everybody. Hello, good afternoon, or good morning if it's still morning where you are. My name is Amy Gravino. I am so happy to be here today on the Autism on the Mighty Facebook page. I am an autism consultant, writer, professional public speaker, and advocate for adults on the autism spectrum. And I am here today to speak with you about some of my experiences growing up on the autism spectrum, what it was like for me as a person on the spectrum, but specifically as a girl and young woman on the autism spectrum, which presented its own unique challenges and issues that are not the same as those faced necessarily by boys on the spectrum. So that's what I wanted to speak to you about, and I am here to answer your questions, so please feel free to ask me anything. I'm not shy. So just to give you a little bit of background, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at the age of 11 in 1994. People really didn't know anything about autism back then. There was not, a national conversation on autism, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, let alone any kind of support or service for a girl on the spectrum. Any information that my parents came across mostly, I think, talked about boys on the spectrum, because of the diagnosis ratio, four times as many boys than girls. And that was what was accepted at the time. And so when I finally began going to support groups, which wasn't until much later, when I was in college, the majority of the people in the support groups were guys. And one of two things would happen in these support group meetings. I would either be hit on, or they would treat me like I was an alien. And I wasn't there for either one of those things. I was there because I needed help, just like they did. But it was much more difficult as a girl, because when you walk into such a male-dominated space, sort of the first response is, "Oh, look, a girl, she can be my girlfriend." And that's obviously not what I'm there for. And so there was really no kind of dialogue around the issues faced by women and girls on the autism spectrum, which are, not too dissimilar from issues faced by neurotypical women. Because in addition to dealing, with being on the spectrum, we have to deal with how women are expected to behave in this society, which carries with it a whole bunch of other issues. And so growing up, I was not immune to feeling the pressures that so many neurotypical women feel. I would read all the teen magazines, and I would look at the outfits I was supposed to wear and the makeup I was supposed to put on, and I just couldn't. I didn't have either the fine motor skills to apply makeup, or I was so skinny that I couldn't fit into the clothes that were supposedly fashionable, or the materials were itchy and I couldn't wear them. And I was so extremely self-conscious about myself. I had incredibly low self-esteem all through school. And I was indeed bullied all through school, from elementary school right up until graduation. That didn't stop. And the thing is, there's a unique kind of bullying that occurs between girls versus the kind of bullying that occurs with boys. So sometimes when boys on the spectrum, boys are bullied, it can take on a more physical tact. But with me, it was more emotional bullying. It was them pretending to be my friend one day and then completely ignoring me the next, and me having no idea. Did I feel compelled to understand my diagnosis? If so, what resources proved to be helpful? That's a great question, Melissa. Thank you. I was diagnosed at 11 years old. When you're 11, you don't know anything. What you know is when someone is different. And I was different, and I didn't fully understand why. And I just, the mindset at that point was, well, what's wrong with everybody else? Why don't they see things the way that I do? Once I hit puberty, once that started to kick in, and all those pressures to want to fit in, it became, what's wrong with me? Why can't I see things the way everybody else does? And so I kind of distanced myself from the diagnosis, at that point. I didn't want anything to do with it. I thought, this is not me. I didn't want to believe that I was really affected by this, because there were times when people would say, "Oh, I wouldn't have known that you had autism unless you said something," and so then I would convince myself, I can beat this thing, or this is not, But then inevitably, something would always happen to remind me that I am in fact on the spectrum, and I would be disappointed, I would be crushed by that seeming failure, or what I perceived as failure. So I didn't feel compelled to understand my diagnosis at that age. I just wanted to fit in, like I think every other 12-year-old, 11, 12, 13-year-old wants to do. I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to understand something that meant I was different. All I knew was that being different was bad. That was as much as I understood at that age. And so coming to understand my diagnosis didn't happen until much later, until I was older. So, you know, in addition to obviously not fitting in and having a difficult time with friendships, I also had a very difficult time with dating. Something I've become very passionate about is autism and sexuality. I do presentations regularly about autism and sexuality, and I'm actually writing a memoir called The Naughty Audie, which is with dating and relationships. And my apologies, technological issues. And so I desperately wanted a boyfriend when I was younger. That was something that I wanted so much. And of course, no boy would go near me with a 10-foot pole. And there tends to be, with individuals on the spectrum, a big discrepancy between the age when we're first interested in dating and the age when we actually have a chance to have something happen. So I first had these thoughts and these feelings and interests when I was, 12, 13 years old. But I didn't have my first kiss until I was 17. And the boy that was with, I couldn't understand why his mother was so upset that a 17-year-old girl was interested in her 14-year-old son. So I called him, and she said, "Never ever call here again." Boom. But why? What did I do? Of course, I called back because I had to know what I did wrong. And it was just, one disappointment after another, really, in terms of that. So seeing other girls in the halls at school, seeing them having these typical experiences, having boyfriends, dating, I felt as though I had my face pressed up a pane of glass, and I was looking in desperately, standing out in the cold, but I could never be part of that myself. Now, obviously, like a lot of the things that I deal with, I have people come up to me after my presentations and they say, I'm not on the spectrum, but I totally relate to that. I went through that. And that's what I'm trying to sort of stress, is that even though I am autistic and, other people are, we're not so dissimilar. Obviously, there are great differences, but our experiences are not altogether that different. And that's what we need to talk about and realize, because especially among women, I think there's this tendency, not always, but sometimes there's a tendency to be catty and to kind of compare ourselves. It's not so much between men and women, but between women. And so instead of supporting each other, we sort of tear each other down in some way, which is encouraged, again, by society. But if we were to support each other, if I had been given support and friendship, if I'd had that, from that young age, I think it would have benefited me tremendously. Chris asks, how was your diagnosis explained to you as a child, and did you understand it? Well, you know what? I was actually in the room when I received the diagnosis. We had gone from specialist to specialist. I grew up on Long Island, New York, by the way. And so we ended up finally at Stony Brook University in the child psychology department. And I met with this very nice man who was an English psychologist, and he diagnosed me after speaking with me and then speaking with my parents. And so I don't remember exactly how it was explained. I honestly don't have a specific, clear, concrete memory of that. But it was something I was always aware of. It was never hidden from me. I knew. And to me, that's so crucial. I hear oftentimes of parents who are afraid to tell their child that they're on the spectrum. And I cannot overstate how crucial it is to let your child know, because they will know if they're different. They'll know if something is quote, wrong with them. But if they don't know why, that's an even more painful thing. Imagine going through your whole life not realizing that there's an explanation for why you struggle with certain things. And so you just think that there's something really wrong with you. So to have that knowledge, at least, is valuable. And I urge all parents to tell their children in an age-appropriate way about their diagnosis. Wendy. Okay, I have to expand this, excuse me. Did you have aggression issues at a younger age? If so, what would you say helped you work through those aggressive feelings? Uh, Not really. Again, I think being a girl, it was a different sort of expression. I mean, if I had any aggression, it was toward myself. Usually, it wasn't toward other people. Um, I did not. If I lashed out, if I had a meltdown, it was just because of not being able to hold on anymore, but not being able to hold on to my emotions anymore, and it all just kind of came exploding out. So I didn't really have other aggression in that sense, in terms of lashing out at other people. I did get into fights with my father. We did have some physical altercations, but nothing really beyond that. But I would say one thing that did help me work through the feelings I did have, which were a lot of pain and a lot of anxiety, was writing. I started writing poetry when I was 10 years old, and writing has just been an enormous, wonderful outlet for me ever since then. So some kind of creative outlet can definitely help, I think, work out aggression and work out other feelings. So that's something to consider, and I thank you for that question. Carrie, hey Carrie, what is one of your favorite events you've spoken at? That's a great question. I would say that one of my favorite events would be the United Nations. I spoke at the United Nations for World Autism Awareness Day in 2011. That was on a panel sponsored by Autism Speaks. That was an amazing event, and I'd never been on a world stage in that way before. So I was really thrilled to have that opportunity to be able to be up there with all these people who, were our leaders, really, and then little old me on the end of the panel. So that was an amazing experience. Another would be an event that I just spoke at, which is that I just gave my second TED Talk. I spoke at TEDx Jersey City just last month, and it was a really wonderful time. And again, I spoke about autism and sexuality. My talk was titled "Why Autism is Sexier Than You Think It Is," and it will be available on YouTube soon. So that was a really great event. A TED Talk is a whole other kind of experience, and I was really thrilled to have that opportunity to do that. So I would say two favorite events would be the United Nations and then my TEDx talk this past month. So thank you for asking that. Oh, one more. I also, the day after the TED Talk, I spoke on a panel at the UJA in New York City, the Jewish, the Federation. They had a self-advocacy panel and a self-advocacy forum, excuse me. And the panel I was on was all women, which in all the panels that I've been on in my time as a speaker, I've never been on a panel that was entirely made up of women. And I think that's so important. I think it's so important to have the voices of women with disabilities out there because we're often just not heard. We have some more questions coming in. I'm just trying to read them here. Thank you, Monique. Thank you so much for the rock on. I went to public school. I was mainstreamed because there were no self-contained classrooms back then. There was no anything like that. So I was mainstreamed all through school. And then I went to college. I went to a Catholic college, which I don't know why, because I never had gone to Catholic school before. And then I went for my master's degree just a couple of years ago at another Catholic college in New Jersey. And so, sorry, lots of stuff coming in. I'm just trying to scroll back here, excuse me. What helped me relate to my peers? There wasn't really anything, to be honest with you. I had a wonderful guidance counselor at elementary school who did try to help, but she, there was only so much that she could do, and then she set me up to meet with the middle school guidance counselor, and that was all organized. And then right before I started middle school, that guidance counselor retired, so suddenly the rug was pulled out, and I really didn't have any support at all in middle school, and there wasn't really anything to help me relate to my peers. I'm sorry to say there were no kinds of supports like that back then. That's just the way it was. We have another thing here. You're very welcome, Leaf. Thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Have you had a hard time making friendships? Do you want to have friends? I did have a number of difficulties, obviously, making friends when I was younger. I have some great friends now, people that I love and cherish so deeply. But it was a tremendous struggle because I did have that desire, but I just didn't have that ability to kind of naturally insert myself into these social situations. And it was, very obvious. And so I was ridiculed for my attempts and bullied. And so, it's hard because the thing that we all want is to be accepted for who we are. But who I was not acceptable for so long. It was not okay to be who I am. And so it wasn't until I went to college that finally I was able to be who I really am and have that person accepted. And that made all the difference in the world. And so finally beginning to gain confidence in myself, I think that really, really helps. There's nothing that anyone can do for you that is as powerful as you believing in yourself. I had to learn that. There was nothing anyone could have said to me about how great I am or anything that had meant nearly as much as it did the day I looked in the mirror and was able to like what I saw. So that was what made the change. So thank you for that question. Lizzie, how to support your daughter as she goes through puberty? Yes, that's a tough one. Bras, let me tell you, if I don't have to wear a bra, I don't. I mean, I'm small-chested, obviously, it's not a huge deal, but they're not comfortable. These things are medieval torture devices. I mean, who really likes them? But if you can find one that doesn't have any underwire, that's a good way to go. My mother doesn't like underwire either, so definitely there are ones that don't have them, which might help. And if you can find cotton ones, they're not made of those terrible fabrics, those can be helpful as well. But the number one thing I would say about puberty is you have to remember, people want to blame things on the autism. They want to say, oh, this is why, she's acting like this. And then you have to remember, if you have a teenager on the spectrum, they're not just on the spectrum, they're also a teenager. And so those hormones are screwing them up as much as anything. And I would say, let them go through that. Let them feel those feelings. Like, it's okay. It's not a bad thing to have to learn to work through those emotions because, they're very powerful. And, I remember for me as a teenager, the littlest things felt like the end of the world. Just absolutely felt like catastrophes on an enormous scale, even though they obviously weren't. So, the physical aspect, was not fun either. Obviously, I remember I didn't even understand what my period was when I got it. I ruined 5 pairs of underwear before my mother came in the room finally and was like, oh, you're a woman now. And I said, what? I don't it didn't make any sense to me. And so, puberty is not fun for anybody. And I think it's important to stress that she's not the only one going through this. It's so common. I know for me, I especially felt like I was completely alone. Not just being on the spectrum, but then going through all of that. It felt like everybody else was dealing with all of this so much better than I was. Everybody else has their stuff together. Why don't I? Why am I the only hot mess walking through the school's hallways? Obviously I wasn't, but I didn't have that awareness and I didn't understand that at the time. And especially not knowing anybody else on the spectrum, or almost no one at that point, it was an extremely lonely time. Sabrina, I'm trying to understand Asperger's, find it hard to show emotion. Yes, it can be absolutely. You know what? It's very hard because there are so many expectations that I think exist, especially for women on the spectrum. We're expected to bond emotionally and to talk about these things that women talk about. I don't know, for example, what babies, all these, and I don't. That's not anything that is of an interest to me. I don't have any desire to have children ever, and so I can't really understand the fascination with babies. Obviously, a lot of women are into that, and so it's hard for me to kind of, be part of that. I can't really relate. But the way I like to put it is there's a tribe for every weirdo. If you're a weirdo, you have a tribe out there somewhere. You just have to find them. And sometimes that can take a long time. It doesn't happen right away, obviously. These things, it's a gradual process and it is difficult, but you will find your tribe. I can tell you that they are out there because I didn't think that I would find mine, and I finally did. It may have taken me 20 odd years, but I finally got there. Monique, were you encouraged to make eye contact as a child? How did that make you feel? Yes, obviously, eye contact is something that gets stressed a lot in our society, and it was difficult for me. I think other people on the spectrum have described it as it's like you're so vulnerable when you make eye contact with someone. You're seeing into their soul almost. That's kind of what it feels like. I'm much more able to make eye contact now. And part of what was hard for me with making eye contact when I was younger was that I felt like the person would look at me and they would see right into me. Like they could see all my vulnerabilities, they could see every single thing about me, and I knew nothing about them because I had a hard time reading people. So to me, eye contact was like that. It was like revealing myself completely, and it was scary. So you're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you guys are here. I really appreciate you being here. This is great. Yeah, no, but the thing to keep in mind, I would say, is you don't want to force someone to make eye contact if they're not completely comfortable. People think that if you're not making eye contact, you're not paying attention. But in fact, it is easier for me to listen and process what someone is saying if I'm not making direct eye contact. Because if I'm putting all my energy into making eye contact, then I can't focus on what they're saying. So eye contact is not the be-all, end-all of every social interaction. You're welcome. Thank you guys. You guys rock. What were my challenges in a middle school setting, and what helped you get through middle school? Let me just say it right out. Middle school is hell. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're on the spectrum or not on the spectrum. Middle school is an absolute nightmare. In some ways, it's even worse than high school. My challenges were not few. Just existing was a challenge. You know, just drawing breath into my lungs and finding the wherewithal in me to just get through another day. You know, my father will tell you how hard it was to get me up out of bed every day to get me to school. And I say to you, why would a person want to go to a place where they're so completely miserable and depressed? You know, it was like going into prison every day. So I don't know what got me through that exactly, except some kind of you know, strength in me that I didn't even know existed at that point. I think a lot of individuals on the spectrum have an inner strength that we're forced to draw on because of the issues that we face in life. And so something in me kept me going. I've often wondered this because I was suicidal from, I would say, about the age of 10 right up until I graduated high school. And purely on a practical level, I couldn't commit suicide. I wasn't able to swallow pills at that age. I was afraid of knives and sharp things and blood. And so, yeah, I couldn't do it practically. But on some other level, something kept me from going through with it. And sometimes I feel guilt. I feel like there's so many others who didn't make it through. Why me? And I guess I made it through because I am here to be a voice for those who can't speak for themselves or who are not listened to in the way that they should be. So I wish I could say that there was something that got me through middle school, but there wasn't any specific support. It was just something in me that refused to give up. And that's a part of who I am and always will be. I'm just trying to see this. Yes, thank you so much, Leaf. Thank you. Absolutely. And I am so happy to help in any way that I can. You know, I've been there firsthand and I know what it's like. And as I said, I've really fallen into the area of autism and sexuality specifically because it is such an under-addressed topic. And I'm referred to as the Dr. Ruth of the autism world because I'm short and I speak about sexuality. So I'm hoping that will help people too. But so relating, again, going back just for a moment to some of what I faced as a young woman, I didn't have my first boyfriend, you know, until I was in college. I was 19, and I didn't know what it meant to be a girlfriend. I believed that I had to play this role. So rather than being Amy Gravino, who happens to be somebody's girlfriend, I was trying to play this part. I had all this information about what a girlfriend is. I had this information from the movies, from TV shows, from magazines. So I was on an intellectual level trying to understand what this meant and play this part. And it was difficult. You know, nothing in this world has been more rewarding than being who I am. And so I made a lot of mistakes and I learned a lot, you know, from that. And I learned that just because somebody wants to date you doesn't mean that they're worth dating. You know, I had to figure that out, and it wasn't easy. It certainly wasn't easy because I didn't know I was allowed to have standards. I thought, look at me, you know, I'm not the most attractive person. Mind you, this is not my current mindset, but this is what I believe because of years of being called ugly. So that was how I saw myself. So my thought was, you know, this person thinks I'm attractive and wants to date me. If I don't date them, I'll never have a boyfriend ever. So that was the mindset that I carried with me. Let's see. Monique asks, how could your middle school and high school experience have been better? What did you need during those? What did I need during those years? Not in any particular order. Friends, breasts, self-esteem. Yeah, all those three for sure. I needed someone to tell me really that it was okay to be me, that I was okay. I just didn't have that. You know, I can't think of a single person who really expressed that it was okay for me to be who I was. And I can't tell you how difficult life is when you don't have that. When you are under the constant belief that nothing about you is okay, that everything about you is broken and wrong and unlovable, you know. I still struggle with this. It's not completely gone. The thought that I'm too difficult to love. That's something that I've been afraid of for a long time, and obviously I haven't had the best of luck in the relationship department even to now, so I still have that fear in my heart that I'm too difficult to love, and I want to believe it's not true, but you know what? I'm still struggling with that. That's not completely behind me, so it never fully goes away, and I think if I'd had more of an ability to love myself at a younger age, maybe I wouldn't be struggling with this so much. I don't know. I all the could have, would have, should have's in the world won't ever let me say what would have helped me, because I've just had to push through, and I just had to get to this point, and I'm sorry, it makes me emotional. It actually does. You know what? It really does, and I still get emotional at some of my talks because it's very hard. And thank you all so much. Thank you. Really, I'm so grateful that you're all here and that you're part of this. I really appreciate it. So to tell you a little bit more, so I had that first boyfriend in college, and that, you know, he ended up dumping me, and he ended up assaulting me, which sounds worse than it actually was. He was 6'3", I'm 5'0", and he slapped my forehead with his hand and kicked me in the shin. So I had to go to the police. I got a protection from abuse order, and that was an interesting experience, going to court. I'd never done that before. That was very painful. But so that was a learning experience, of course, in and of itself. Thank you. Oh, I'm just reading everything you guys are writing. There's a lot coming through here. Jenna says, I have a family member, early 20s, who has Asperger's, is extremely angry and tends to isolate himself from the family. Any insight on how we can rebuild the relationship and help him to be engaged in the family? Well, I think I would need a little bit more information to answer that question. There are dysfunctional relationships in all families. It would be important to know exactly what causes his anger, finding out the root cause of that, and then working from there. It can be toxic in some ways for someone to be around people who are harmful to them mentally and emotionally. And I'm not saying that your family is doing that, but if someone feels a certain way, if they feel angry, there has to be a reason for that. So I think it's important to find out what the reason behind that is before going further. So I don't want to give any incorrect advice. I think I would need a little more information. Lizzie says, is there a better way to explain feelings, caring, love than just modeling and discussing it? My daughter struggles with understanding when others are mean. Yeah, that's a hard one for sure. It's a kind of a matter of perspective taking, I think, to some extent. If you if you if you ask your daughter, like, what do you think is mean? What's to you? What does it look like when someone's mean? What does their face look like? What do they sound like when they're being mean? Is it a loud voice, a soft voice? Kind of making it as concrete as possible, I think might help to do that. And then, kind of drawing it on her experience. What do you feel when you think about love? You know what I mean? Sort of, and then trying to give the perspective of what somebody else might feel when they're being mean, or when they feel love for someone. Sort of, I wish I had a better explanation for it than that. I think that yeah, people also tend to be not so direct when they are angry, when they are hurt. People want to, be kind of passive aggressive, or they don't exactly say, "This is why I am hurt," which is not helpful. I think if we were all more direct, the world would be a better place. But so that's some suggestions there, which I hope might be helpful. Exactly. Yes, Melissa. You know what? It's an absolute truth to realize you don't have to lower your standards. No, but not even lower, but that I can even have standards. That was something that I didn't even believe I could actually have, because I thought anyone who shows me the slightest bit of attention, I have to like this person and date this person and be good to this person, because if I don't, nobody else will ever, care about me or be interested in me ever again. It took me years to realize that is not, in fact, the case. That people will be interested in me, and I don't have to do things with them or have sex with them or whatever it may be just because they want to with me. So it took a long time to realize that, and realize that it's okay to have, those kinds of standards. So after, the breakup with my ex-boyfriend in college, I fell in love for the first time, when I was 22 years old. And it was with a guy that I met online. Huge mistake, I know. And I wound up moving across the country, 3,000 miles to Seattle. That's where he was from. And I wanted, to be his girlfriend. But what I didn't know at the time was that he was, too busy with the girlfriend that he already had, that I didn't know existed. And that I didn't find out existed until after I had lost my virginity to him. And then she proceeded to harass me, call me up all hours of the day and night. Threatened to kill me if I didn't leave town, yada, yada, yada. And it turned into this whole huge thing, and it was absolutely heartbreaking on every level, I would say, that exists. And it took me, I would say, a good 7 years to fully get over that, to fully really move past that, and to not feel so completely gun shy. And the exact moment that I knew I'd gotten over this terrible heartbreak was when I developed feelings for someone new, A, which I didn't think I'd be able to do, but then B, it didn't work out with that person, and I was still okay afterward. And that was something I wasn't sure would happen. I didn't think that I could have feelings for someone and have it not work out and I would get through it. But I did. And that's when I knew that I was going to be okay, that I was okay. So that was and that was about 5 years ago that happened. So it's been quite a journey, I would say, for sure. And all of this is going to be in my book, by the way. There's a whole chapter about the night I lost my virginity. There's going to be all kinds of good stuff, so I hope that you will read it when it comes out. And so just to, yes, Helga, absolutely. There's some kind of obsession with people being the same, with everybody fitting a certain mold. But we obviously all don't fit any kind of mold. We're all different people, right? It sort of reminds me of, I don't know if any of you are Monty Python fans, but it reminds me of the film Life of Brian. You're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. You're all different. Yes, we're all different. I'm not. But it's true. It's to the hallmark of being an adult is being able to think for yourself and to be independent and different, and that comes in all kinds of different forms and ways. There is no one way to be an adult. There is no one way to live exactly, and we have to understand that, because if we don't, it's going to be that much harder for individuals on the spectrum to succeed and thrive in our world. And again, as a woman, I especially am kind of bound to these societal pressures of, the greatest thing that a woman can do is have a child and all that. And again, that's not something that I ever want for myself. I do not want to have children, and I don't consider that my ultimate goal. Obviously, I don't begrudge another woman if that's what she wants to do, by all means. But for me, there are other things that I have in mind. I'm setting out to change the world, so I'm a little busy at the moment. I got a lot on my plate. So Monique asks, do you live independently? Mostly. I live on my own. I live in the top floor of a house, so it's an apartment. But it's a house, but it's a unit of its own. But I'm not financially independent yet. My parents are still taking care of my bills and things, so I'm not financially independent yet. But I hope to be one day. That's what I consider independence for me personally, is being able to pay for my bills and things. So I'm not quite there yet, but I do live on my own. I cook. I love to cook. I'm a huge home cook. I'm obsessed with cooking. That's my special interest, which I never really had up until now. And I can do my laundry. I write out my rent checks I have an office in Fairfield, New Jersey for my business. So I write out my rent checks, and I drive. I have a car. And so I am fairly independent, I would say, other than paying my own bills. Yes, Kirsten, this is being recorded for posterity. This will be available on the Autism on the Mighty Facebook page after this, so I hope folks will watch it. So just to, I guess, to continue just a little bit more about some of the things that I have faced in terms of being a girl and a woman on the spectrum. It is, many of you may have noticed, or may or may not, I don't know, a lot of girls and women are diagnosed much older than boys. They're diagnosed in their 30s, 40s, 50s. I know women diagnosed in their 60s. And so, women oftentimes learn how to mask their symptoms, learn how to cope, and so engage in a lot of compensatory behaviors. And that's why we often go under the radar, and we don't get diagnosed until we're older. And then, yes, and even then it's hard to get support because there is so little in the way of support for adults on the spectrum, which is why that's my area of focus. A lot of people are doing early intervention, but I didn't really like kids when I was a kid. So let the people who are good at that do that, more power to them. But I know that there is a dearth of services and supports for adults on the spectrum, so that's why I'm working in that area. Shane says, I was diagnosed with Asperger's late in life. My family doesn't support me because I wasn't diagnosed early. I am 47. It hurts that they don't think anything is wrong with me or they don't have an illness. Any suggestions? Well, I'm so sorry to hear that, Shane. You know what? There are so many parents of children on the spectrum who are diagnosed themselves when their child is diagnosed. You can find support groups of all these parents, and they can tell you they too were not diagnosed until they were adults. And your truth is your truth, Shane. Your experience is yours, and they may want to discredit it, or they may want to, not believe in it, and that's their loss. If they are, harmful to your mental health and to your well-being, cut them out. Maybe not entirely, but cut down on your interactions with them for your own sanity's sake. It's hard, but your life is your own. You have to live it for yourself and for what is right for you. And obviously, yes, Savannah, you can get a diagnosis as an adult. There are many individuals who are diagnosed as adults, as I just mentioned. So, Monique asks, what do you have to say about ABA? Well, Monique, I actually have a master's degree in ABA. I started studying it in 2007, and I earned my master's degree in ABA in 2011 at Caldwell University here in New Jersey. And I think that properly done, it can be a tremendous resource and tremendously helpful, not just to individuals on the spectrum, but to all people, to help people make positive changes to their behavior. My master's thesis, because we had to conduct a study using the principles of ABA, my master's thesis was that I taught adult men on the spectrum how to ask someone out on a date using the principles of ABA. That was my thesis. And so it the things that we may not even think of as ABA actually are just self-monitoring, monitoring your own behavior. That's ABA right there. So I think that if a practitioner knows what they're doing, if they're competent, if they are working with the person that they're supposed to be helping, and not just implementing behavior plans without their input, because you cannot have an effective behavior plan, a good behavior plan, without incorporating the input of your client. You absolutely have to engage them in the process. So if a person is competent and well trained and knows what they're doing, ABA is absolutely, I think it can be a good thing. Obviously there are horror stories, there are things that have come out about abuses that have occurred in the past, but the ABA of today is a very different thing than ABA of the past, I would say. And so, but of course, any intervention, any therapy is only as good as a practitioner who practices it. So that's just something to keep in mind for anything. That goes for any profession. And perhaps ABA might have helped me when I was younger with some of my challenges, but I didn't have access to that back then. So there's a lot of things I wish had existed. Shane says, my IQ is 128. What is yours? I believe my IQ is right around there, Shane. I want to say 130 maybe. I don't know. I haven't had it tested in a while. Numbers are great, right? Me personally, I love words. I am all about words. Obviously, I love to write. I love language. I love to read. I've been a voracious reader since I was a kid. I guess you could use the word hyperlexic. I was reading the side of Cheerios boxes when I was 3. But yes, certainly a lot of folks on the spectrum love numbers. I think numbers are comforting. They just provide a sense of stability, I think, in a certain way. But you know what? Everybody's different, obviously. I mean, I've never been very good at math. That's not really my area, but for some people it is. And so that's kind of what I try to emphasize. That's another reason why a lot of girls and women aren't diagnosed, is because the stereotypes of autism, fixated with numbers, good with math and science, that kind of stuff. Not all girls and women fit that mold necessarily. And so it's like we get overlooked and ignored because we don't fit those certain stereotypes. And I felt that as when I started engaging with the autism community, it was hard because I didn't fit a lot of those stereotypes. So I felt like I was in the minority of a, you know what I mean, in a way. And Wendy asks, do you rely on a detailed daily schedule? I find that surprises, unknown events seem to bother my son. I probably could use a daily schedule. That was, I guess, the nice thing about being in school, is that you had a structured day, and now I kind of don't. I don't have a detailed daily schedule. It might be a good thing. I do like to plan things, if I'm going to meet up with a friend, for example, I don't really like playing it by ear, as the saying goes. I like to, okay, this is where we're going to go for dinner at this time, and because it just helps, especially, if I'm meeting up with someone in the city, for example, New York City, because I live not too far from there. I want to know where we're going to go for the most part. I like to have kind of a plan, because I have to get the bus back home, and what time is the bus, and I don't want to miss, I have to know those things. So I don't have a detailed daily schedule at the moment, but probably it might be helpful in some ways. So we're almost out of time, and I guess I can tell you, another thing about me, about what I have gone through is also the pressure of feeling like there is only one way to be a woman, right? That's another thing that women in our society have impressed upon us, is you have to, look this way, and you have to act this way, and you have to wear these shoes and do this and that, and it's crazy. Because there is no one way to be a woman. Every person is different, but these pressures and these feelings of inadequacy when I couldn't meet these standards were overwhelming. As painful as it might be for a neurotypical person going through puberty at that time, it was even more so for me. I felt so acutely that I was so different. I was so keenly aware of it. A lot of people think that if you're autistic, you're not really aware of what's going on around you, but I knew everything that was going on around me. It was just so overwhelming that I couldn't filter it all out. And in addition to being aware of what was going on around me, I was aware of how much I was not fitting into it. And that was, extremely difficult and painful. But I tell you, the great thing about where I'm at now is that I no longer care what people think of me. I got to a certain point where I just finally stopped caring what people thought of me. And that day was the greatest day of my life. It was so freeing. And it's really, I know it's hard for people to do that. I mean, I never thought that I certainly would get to that point because I was so keenly aware of what people thought of me. And I thought that I had to be liked by everyone in order to be a good person. I correlated, if you're liked by people, that means you're a good person. But obviously I know differently now. I know that the people who like me are the people who matter, and the people who matter to me are the people that I like. And so it's, oh, hi, AAPC Publishing, thank you so much. Well, I have had interest from Jessica Kingsley publishers. I don't know, I don't have a release date at the moment because I am sending to them a copy of my manuscript hopefully soon, and they just want to take a look-see at that before they agree to publish it. So I'm trying to get that completed and get that on off to them, and I'm obviously hopeful that it will be sometime this year. So, fingers crossed. My daughter is attempting, okay. Yes. So, sorry, I was reading a comment that someone left. And I just want to thank you all so much for your wonderful questions today and your comments. You've all been absolutely so incredibly gracious and welcoming, and I truly do appreciate it. This has been so much fun. And I hope that, some of what I've said today has been helpful. Just to let you all know, I am a professional speaker, and you can find me on my website, www.amygravino.com. And I am available, so feel free to reach out if you need a speaker for your event or at your school or conference, whatever it may be. I do keynote addresses as well, so please feel free to reach out. Who would I love to portray me if a movie were to be made? You know what? I've thought of that. I have thought of that because I actually would love to turn my book into a one-woman show on Broadway that I would do. And then if it were to be a movie, oh, I don't know. See, it's kind of like this whole thing of where I don't like using fake names or anything that somehow subverts my identity, because I have spent so long learning to embrace my identity and be the best Amy Gravino that I can be, that I hate the thought of being anyone else. And I hate the thought of somebody else trying to portray me, because I feel like nobody can be a better Amy Gravino than I can. So I don't know who I'd want to play me in a movie. That would be tough. I don't know, man. I'd have to really, it would have to be someone that I would really be able to trust with my story. And that's hard. Because it took me a long time to just trust myself with my own story. But here I am. So, You're welcome, Dex. Thank you so much. Really, I'm so glad that what I've said has been helpful, and I hope that you'll all like my Facebook fan page, which is linked in the description of this video. And I want to thank you guys all so much for being here, for your great questions. The thing that I would leave you all with is to remember, as you all know, if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism, and there are so many amazing girls and women on the spectrum out there doing amazing work, who are my inspirations and my heroes. And I would encourage you to listen to us, whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent. The greatest resource you have is adults on the spectrum who have lived through all of this, who have gone through what your child either is going through or will be going through in a few years. And so avail yourself to us, engage with us in a respectful way. And you will find that we have such valuable information to give you from our lived experiences, which, for many of us have been challenging, but have also been rewarding in a lot of ways. So please don't be afraid to ask me questions. You can contact me on my fan page, if you would like. And I just want to thank you all so very much. And I've had a great time. Thank you to the Mighty for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon. So have a great day, and thanks again, everyone.